Welcome back. In this episode, we do some much needed repairs to our ride-on so we can get this lawn mowed again. Because I tell you what, it's taking forever doing it like this. Well, I've got a surprise for you. This is going to be a series, not just an episode, because we're going to go through a lot of maintenance items on a typical ride-on lawnmower or lawn tractor, as people like to call them. Ours is a Husqvarna LTH1842, so it's got the Kohler 18 horsepower motor and a 42-inch pressed steel cutting deck. Now, the first part of this series is dealing with the cutting deck. It's a pressed steel cutting deck, not a fabricated steel cutting deck. And that could be a part of the issue. A fabricated cutting deck is much better if you're hunting around for a ride-on than a pressed steel, because it's made of a lot thicker steel plate and it's welded together. A pressed steel cutting plate is easy to identify because it's a molded shape rather than a welded plate shape. Now, the problem with the pressed steel decks is that they can wear out a lot quicker and get deformed over time, particularly if they've had a lot of abuse through their life. Now, in our particular case, we've had a lot of issues with adjusting the deck on our lawnmower and getting a nice even cut from the two blades which sit underneath. In going through some of the adjustment processes, we've discovered we've actually got a broken spindle, which is causing one of the blades to hang down. So we're cutting like this. It's really not a good thing. So we've ordered in some new parts. We've got new spindles, pulleys, and we're going to pull it down and go into why this might have occurred and how you go about fixing it. So I've just set our cutting deck up here, upside down of course, so you can have a bit of a look at the mechanisms from underneath. That's a lot easier than trying to crawl in underneath. And really, unless you've got the deck out, you never really see a lot of this. So what you have is you've got your two drive spindles, which come down from the top. So your belts go onto the pulleys on the opposite side of these, and they've got bearings inside them which spin and drive these blades around. So obviously then you have your mower blades. We just replaced these blades with some genuine Husqvarna mulching blades. So they're good to go still. This is one of the problem solvers. I thought maybe the blades were bent or blunt, and ours were pretty chewed out. So we put new blades on it a few months ago, so the blades are still good to go. Now, one of the issues I've got, and I'll bring the camera in to show that, is it may still be a slightly bent deck because these blades are misaligned when they get to the middle, and what that is doing is it's causing a deformed cut. So you've got the two blades going through, so you're cutting this sort of width as you go down along your lawn. Now what I'm getting is a jump in the cut halfway through the mowing cycle. Now you can alleviate that to a point by cross mowing back over the top of it so that the misaligned blade then goes to the opposite side, but you end up with a bit of a wavy look on the lawn, and really it's not great. So if you take these blades off, what you're left with are the spindles. And these are the two spindles that are in here. This side here had a guard around it, which is the factory guard, which goes onto the deck. And that protects this spindle from debris and objects going into it. Now this spindle's fine. this is a spindle that we actually discovered to be broken. So what's happened here is these actually aren't connected anymore. So the fixing lugs have broken off over a period of time. They've gotten stress fractures in them, and then eventually it's probably hit something and just snapped them off. So what we've ended up with is this moving around. One point was still fixed. It was probably still lodged in there fairly well because of the triangulation of the spindle casting. But what's happened is this has the opportunity to flex and move around as it gets the cultivation from the blades going around. So just the force of the blades going around is enough for this to flex around a little bit. And that's where we're getting this varying finish to the mowing as we're going through, because this is flexing and vibrating and moving around, and it's been nearly impossible to get the deck leveled because this is constantly sitting in a slightly different alignment. Now it's the middle part that's out of alignment, so when this is on the ground and you're fiddling around underneath trying to get these blades level, you're usually aligning the blades from side to side at these ends, and then you're tilting the deck to get the back tilt on it, and then you're matching the blades up from this side to this side. So you're not really focusing on this inside bit. It wasn't until I was looking in and the blades ended up being aligned that I noticed. These two blades were out of step by quite a bit. So what I was doing when this whole fiasco happened was I was actually packing this spindle down with some washers as an experiment to see if I could get it to better align through this portion here and adjusting the deck to suit to alleviate this marking we were getting in our lawn. I'll cross to a bit of a clip on that. That gives an explanation of what the physical effects of having these blades out of alignment was. Okay, so here's a bit of the problem as I discussed. This became more evident yesterday when I think it finally broke a little bit more. You can sort of see down here, got a very distinct line of where the mower blades have been cutting down too low. You can see here in particular it's sort of cut drastically low. No matter how much we adjusted it, we just couldn't work it out. So what are the things that we need to look out for when we're maintaining our ride-on lawnmower? Firstly, obviously, the spindles are pretty important, but there's other bits and pieces on these that you need to look at as you're going through replacing blades or also replacing belts. So the first thing obviously that most people go and maintain on their ride-on is a drive belt. Ours isn't in too bad a condition, so we've elected to maintain it. But you want to look around and just check for general wear and tear, any cracking or deterioration of this belt. It's very important in maintaining the use of your mower. So if your belt's been on for a very long time and you're looking at doing some maintenance, it'd be a very good idea to replace this as part of the process. Secondly, it's the star gear on the bottom of the spindle. Now, different makes of mowers have different locking mechanisms for the blades to go on, but essentially what that does is that is a mechanism to lock the blade onto the bottom of the spindle. Now these can wear out, particularly if the blade's been loose somewhere along the line and is flopping around. So if you are looking to change your blades, get underneath your mower and make sure that this is reasonably tight and not likely to slop and move around. Another area where people probably aren't aware is that the pulleys that the belt goes onto fit onto the spindles by way of a spline. Now one of our pulleys, and this isn't off the spindle that's broken, this is the one that was operational, has basically worn out inside of the notches which goes down and locks onto the spline. Now you could consider this as reasonably serviceable. I mean, it was working fine before, but I've ordered a new pulley and new spindles to make sure that everything is locking together and is as per factory. And obviously we've got the spindles themselves. Depending on what kind of lawn you have and the landscape you're mowing, these spindles, when you think about it, can take a fair bit of abuse. So from here, we've got a blade that's hanging off it and is hitting rocks and sticks and all sorts of things as you're mowing, particularly if you've got a harsh environment. So there's a reasonable amount of weight and force when this is operating, and it's made of cast aluminium. And looking at the casting for the spindle, it's actually quite porous and has a fair bit of areas for fatigue. So you've got 3 or 4 points, depending on your spindle, which is holding the whole assembly, taking the weight and the load of the pulleys and the belts on top, particularly when you're turning it on and off, and also the blade underneath as it's hitting and ricocheting off things if you are hitting sticks. Our block here, we're trying to establish it. We've got a lot of large gum trees, and look, to be honest, it's not uncommon to hit a branch every now and again as you're mowing. And that's obviously deflecting and putting pressure on these mounting points of your spindles. Now, it's quite hard to see. You really want to take them off and check for cracking around the base of the casting. Now, another thing is if you've got a second-hand mower and you don't really know the history of it, you might discover you're missing parts as you disassemble it. So in our case, we've got one guard and we're missing the other. So I will order another one in, but for now I'm going to assemble it just with the single guard. This guard sits over the top of the spindle. So you install it in the sequence. You've got your cutting deck, this goes in first, and then your spindle gets bolted underneath. Now the idea of this guard is to stop debris and objects blowing into the spindle and ricocheting back up underneath the deck, and it stops a lot of grass, I'm expecting, as well, sort of being chewed up through the opening in the hull of the deck as well. So it's just a protective mechanism for the spindle. Now, interestingly, the one that broke didn't have this on there, so that might be a factor to it as well. Okay, to get this project underway, we've ordered in some parts. So let's see what we've got. 2 new heavy-duty spindles, 2 new belt pulleys, and an engine service kit suited to the Kohler 18 horsepower. Okay, it's easy as just putting these spindles in. Now I'm going to leave the debris guard off for now while I'm ordering another one in. You want to get 1 or 2 bolts in underneath just to get it started. So then we're going to flip it over. Now, from what I can work out, you need to check each mower, obviously. These are all fairly universal. Most of the popular brands use very similar components, and it's just checking whether or not it's a 3-point mounting, or some of them do use a 4-point mounting. And then we'll chuck on the blade. Just going to do it all loosely for now, just to get it assembled, and then we'll tighten everything up once it's all installed. And obviously, now that the new blade is in, there's no slack in the star fixing that it goes onto. And essentially that's it. We'll flip the deck over now and put the pulley in from over the top. Okay, I've now flipped the deck over. So this is the top side of the deck. Spindles are in. Now the first thing to go on to the top of each of the spindle shafts are these washers. You then put the pulley on top and the bolt. Now these bolts, you'll notice, have pressed in areas. That's to aid the locking and compression onto the thread. Another option is to use a nylock nut. Now, ideally, I would use a nylock nut because I like to use them, but you still need to rattle these on with an impact gun. So, I don't know, 3 or 4 ugga duckers is probably enough to get them on. And you're going to have to hold the shaft or stop it from turning from underneath, which is why I put the blades on. I'll put some gloves on, and I'll use that to impact gun it on. So again, washer on first, the pulley, and then hand tighten the nuts on. So to rattle these nuts on, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, using a bit of air and a rattle gun. I've been meaning to buy one of the new Ryobi impact drivers. I've got one of the smaller ones, but the larger ones, which have the half drive on them, would be a lot better. I also don't have a deep impact 22mm socket, which is what you need for the nuts for the top of the spindles. So I'm just going to use a normal socket, but ideally you want to use deep impact sockets with rattle guns or impact devices. For some reason, I also couldn't find my gloves. I have no idea where they are. I do have a spare set in the van, but for now I'm just going to use a microfiber cloth. It's nice and soft to grip the blades from underneath. It's just, even though the blades are in reality quite blunt, you don't want them grabbing, spinning around and cutting your hand. Okay, and then from there, you want to put a straight edge from one side of the deck across to the other, line your blades up, and then measure down. So on this one, I measure down to the cutting surface of the blade because this is where we're trying to line it up. So then you want to measure from here to here, which I have 25mm on this side. And I'm just going to mark that on the deck to make it a bit easier or a bit more accurate when we go to level the deck later on. So just mark that point just so you can see it, so you know roughly where the center is that you're trying to align the deck from either side. And then on this side, I've got pretty close to 25mm from there to there back down. So I'm pretty happy with that, and we'll leave that. So that makes it a little bit easier. You'll be able to see these marks from underneath. Now when you get to the middle, these blades line up pretty well now. There is a very slight difference, and for now I have packed this one up about 2 or 3mm, probably because I haven't got the guard on. But if I have the guard on this side and this side, should be the equal distance up. So the deck probably does still have some slight deflection in it, but for now I'm going to do that. They line up pretty good as they pass through, and that's where the issue was before. I did have, the last time I looked at it when I was trying to pack this spindle up, I had about a good 10 to 15mm difference there, and that's what was causing the cutting variance, because this spindle here wasn't sitting properly. So that's a good way to finish the deck off. Measure from side to side, that way you know the blade depth from the bottom of the deck to the underside of the cutting blade is equal across. It's fairly parallel as well, which is what you want, because when you put this deck on, you're basically leveling it from side to side and then front to back, and you want to have a slight tilt on the back. So this concludes this episode before we go and install the deck back in the ride-on. I hope this goes through some of the maintenance items that you need to look at as you're going through and servicing your mower. A lot of people really do it at the start of every mowing season, and that's roughly at the 50-hour point, depending on the size of your land, that the most manufacturers recommend you service your mowers. We've been a little bit lacking. We're very, very busy, but I think it's been a good chance to go through, check everything over, and make sure it's right for the next year or 2 years worth of service. Stay tuned. we'll go through installing the deck, putting the belts on and adjusting it and getting it all level so that you can go out and have a beautiful looking lawn.